Picture this, a lone rider galloping through moonlit forests, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow given life. His satchel holds not gold or jewels, but something far more powerful, words that could tip the balance between war and peace. This was the daily reality for the Shadow Couriers, the invisible threads stitching together a fractured medieval world. While kings and queens took credit for treaties and truces, it was these unsung messengers who carried the truth across enemy lines, often with nothing but their wits and courage to protect them. Their names may have faded from history books, but their legacy lingers in the borders we recognize today, the alliances that shaped nations, and the quiet moments when bloodshed was avoided by a single, well-timed message. What made these 23 individuals so extraordinary wasn't just their bravery, it was their ingenuity. Imagine slipping past watchtowers with letters hidden in loaves of bread, or blending into crowded marketplaces while whispering coded phrases to the right ears. Some posed as merchants, others as pilgrims, all mastering the art of becoming invisible in plain sight. And their missions weren't just about delivering scrolls. They were diplomats without titles, spies without armies, often interpreting the unspoken tensions between rulers and turning them into opportunities for peace. In an era where a single misstep could spark decades of conflict, their role was nothing short of vital. Yet here's what truly connects their story to ours. In a world drowning in misinformation, their commitment to truth feels almost revolutionary. They didn't just carry messages, they safeguarded facts when lies could have meant destruction. Today, as we navigate our own landscapes of division and doubt, their tales remind us that truth has always been worth risking everything for. So let's step into their hidden world together, tracing the footsteps of these 23 Shadow Couriers who proved that sometimes the quietest voices hold the power to change history. Their methods, their sacrifices, and the astonishing impact of their missions, this is the story of how truth, delivered in the darkest hours, can outlast even the mightiest swords. The need for Shadow Couriers grew from a world where trust was as fragile as parchment and alliances could crumble overnight. In an age without instant communication, rulers faced a dangerous dilemma: how to share vital information without their enemies intercepting it. Enter the first Shadow Couriers, masters of discretion who turned everyday roles into perfect cover. Byzantine scribes, for example, could pass through court unnoticed while carrying explosive truths in plain sight, sometimes even writing messages between the lines of official documents in invisible ink made from lemon juice or milk. Merchants had an even greater advantage, their carts and packs offering endless hiding places among spices and silks. And then there were the monks, whose religious vows granted them safe passage through war zones, their robes hiding letters stitched into hems or tucked inside prayer books. But avoiding suspicion was only half the battle. These early couriers developed ingenious methods to ensure their messages reached the right hands. Some memorized entire dispatches word for word, leaving no physical trace to seize. Others used complex cipher systems, like substituting letters with symbols known only to a select few. The most daring employed dead drops, hollowed out trees, loose castle stones, even grave sites where information could be exchanged without face-to-face contact. Preparation was meticulous. A courier might spend weeks learning a region's dialects, customs, and guard rotations before attempting a delivery. What's fascinating is how their tactics evolved with the times. In the Byzantine Empire's Golden Age, Shadow Couriers moved like ghosts through the Grand Palace's marble halls, exploiting its very grandeur as camouflage. As their methods spread west, they adapted to new landscapes. Venetian couriers memorized canal routes for midnight escapes, while those in the Alps used shepherds' whistles to signal safe paths. Each innovation was born from necessity, proving that when truth is at stake, human creativity knows no bounds. These weren't just messengers, they were the original intelligence network, laying groundwork for the delicate art of diplomacy we recognize today. Their story reminds us that sometimes history's most pivotal moments hinge not on grand battles, but on quiet individuals who ensured words, not swords, had the final say. The weaver's loom wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon of war. As her shuttle flew between threads, she encoded battle plans into floral patterns, her tapestries hanging in the very castles plotting against her employers. This was the brilliance of Shadow Couriers, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Pilgrims' staffs hollowed to hide scrolls, rattled with every step but never betrayed their secrets. Minstrels sang ballads full of coded troop movements, their melodies disarming suspicion while delivering deadly serious intelligence. Even the humble baker played his part. One courier in Burgundy smuggled letters inside loaves of bread, the dough's golden crust hiding messages that could topple dukes. But the costume was only the first layer of deception. A pilgrim's robe meant nothing without the calloused feet of a true traveler, or the ability to recite scripture in 3 dialects. The most skilled couriers lived their disguises so thoroughly they often fooled themselves. Take the case of Henry of Provence, who posed as a deaf-mute tinsmith for 17 years, so convincing that when captured, his interrogators gave up after weeks, convinced his silence was genuine. Others memorized local gossip down to the names of childhood sweethearts, weaving personal details into conversations to cement their false identities. The true test came at border crossings and guard posts, where a single hesitation could unravel everything. Here, shadow couriers turned psychology into an art form. Some used reverse psychology, drawing attention to suspicious items like a conspicuously large Bible, while the real message sat in plain sight as a mundane shopping list. Others exploited human predictability, like the courier who always arrived at gates during shift changes, when weary guards were most likely to wave travelers through. Their greatest weapon wasn't stealth, but understanding how people see what they expect to see. What's remarkable is how these techniques mirrored the era's broader culture. Just as illuminated manuscripts hid subversive marginalia, or cathedral gargoyles concealed rainwater systems, shadow couriers embodied the medieval genius for layered meaning. Their legacy lives on in modern intelligence tradecraft, but with one key difference: where today's spies rely on technology, these pioneers had only their wits and whatever ordinary object they could transform into a vessel for truth. In a world where perception was reality, they mastered the ultimate illusion, making the invisible hand that shaped history appear as though it was never there at all. Ciphers weren't just codes, they were lifelines woven into the fabric of survival. While some shadow couriers relied on simple letter substitutions, others devised systems so intricate they'd baffle modern cryptographers. Take the case of a French courier during the 100 Years' War who encoded messages within musical notation, turning melodies into troop movements. A single misplaced note could mean the difference between ambush and alliance. But the true genius lay in their adaptability. In regions where literacy was rare, symbols took the place of letters. A blacksmith's tally marks might detail armor shipments, while a brewer's barrel stamps could map enemy fortifications. Then there was the alchemy of concealment. Invisible ink recipes read like kitchen experiments gone rogue. Lemon juice was the classic choice, but the most resourceful couriers got creative. Onion juice left no scent, while diluted alum revealed messages only under moonlight. The Byzantines took it further, developing a two-part ink system where letters written in gallnut extract would darken when brushed with iron sulfate, a trick so effective it remained in use for centuries. But perhaps the most daring method came from a Spanish courier who painted messages onto eggs with vinegar, then served them boiled to suspicious guards. By the time the shells were cracked, the acid had etched the words onto the hardened whites inside. The chess cipher wasn't just clever, it was psychological warfare. Used by a network of couriers between Venice and Constantinople, each piece's movement corresponded to a letter, but with a twist. The board's starting position changed daily based on the phases of the moon. Without the key, intercepted messages looked like idle game notations. This layered approach reflected a brutal truth: every new cipher sparked a race against enemy codebreakers. When the Mongols began intercepting messages tied to ravens' legs, Tibetan monks switched to weaving coded knots into prayer flags, exploiting the invaders' disdain for women's work. What made these systems extraordinary wasn't their complexity, but their intimacy. Unlike modern encryption, these codes were handcrafted for specific recipients. A Venetian doge cipher might reference his mistress's perfume, while a Persian vizier used lines from his favorite poetry. This personal touch created a paradox. The more tailored the code, the harder it was to crack, yet the greater the consequences if betrayed. Behind every symbol lay unspoken trust, a silent pact that some truths were worth protecting not just with ingenuity, but with lives. Every mile carried the weight of kingdoms, and every shadow could hide a blade. For shadow couriers, the road wasn't just a path, it was a gauntlet where nature and human treachery conspired against them. Picture a mountain pass in winter, where the cold bit deeper than any sword, and a single misstep could bury both messenger and message under avalanches of snow. Or imagine the dense forests of Burgundy, where outlaws lurked behind ancient oaks, their loyalty sold to the highest bidder. Speed was no guarantee of safety either. A courier galloping too fast might draw more attention than a leisurely traveler, turning haste into a death sentence. Yet the most dangerous threats weren't always the obvious ones. A friendly innkeeper offering warm wine might slip poison into the cup, while a seemingly lost child on the roadside could be a scout for ambushers. This forced couriers to develop an almost supernatural sense of intuition, reading the tension in a village square or the unnatural silence of a forest trail. Some traveled with small, loyal escorts, not just for protection but as decoys. One account describes a group where only the lowliest servant carried the real message, while the well-dressed courier at the front drew all the attention. Weather itself became a fickle ally. A sudden storm could erase pursuit, but it could also strand a rider for days. The tale of the courier who survived inside a hollow tree is more than just a story of endurance, it's a lesson in improvisation. With his scrolls wrapped in oiled cloth and pressed against his chest, he turned his own body into a living strongbox, prioritizing the message over his own comfort. Others used nature's brutality to their advantage, like the Nordic couriers who timed their journeys with blizzards, knowing no sane enemy would follow into whiteout winds. Failure wasn't just personal, it was catastrophic. A captured courier didn't merely face death, they endured weeks of torture as captors sought to unravel their networks. Public executions served as grim reminders, with bodies left hanging at crossroads as warnings. Yet, what's striking is how rarely these tactics worked. The fear of failure didn't paralyze the shadow couriers, it sharpened them. They developed contingency plans for every scenario, from swallowing cipher keys to embedding messages in their own wounds, knowing the scar tissue would preserve the truth longer than any parchment. Their resilience reshaped history in ways we're only beginning to understand. When a single snowfall or a suspicious glance could alter the fate of nations, these couriers became masters of chaos, turning peril into purpose. Their legacy isn't just in the messages they delivered, but in the unspoken truth they proved. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to move forward when every shadow whispers turn back. In the glittering halls of Constantinople, where marble floors echoed with whispers of treason and gold mosaics hid watching eyes, the Byzantine Empire perfected the art of shadow courier diplomacy. Theophanes the Whisperer moved through palace corridors like a ghost, his eunuch status rendering him invisible to power-hungry generals who never suspected the delicate servant refilling their wine cups was memorizing their battle plans. His greatest coup came during the revolt of 927, when he carried word of a mutiny to Emperor Romanos by stitching a coded message into the embroidery of an imperial robe right under the rebels' noses. But the empire's genius lay in diversity. While Theophanes worked the gilded cages of court, Lydia of Thessalonica turned commerce into covert operations. Her husband's silk trade provided the perfect cover. Bolts of fabric bound for Bulgarian warlords concealed treaties between their folds. The threads themselves sometimes knotted in complex patterns that translated to troop numbers. When rival merchants grew suspicious, Lydia pioneered a brilliant ruse. She'd intentionally let guards discover fake letters in obvious hiding spots, while the real messages traveled in plain sight as mundane inventory lists written in an obscure Armenian dialect. These couriers didn't just transmit information, they actively shaped it. A surviving account from the 10th century describes how courier Basil the translator intercepted a Frankish envoy's ultimatum and deliberately softened its language before reaching the emperor's ears, buying critical weeks for diplomacy. Others acted as early intelligence analysts, like the scholar courier Anna Komnene, who cross-referenced battlefield reports with ancient military texts to advise her father, Emperor Alexios. Their work created a delicate ecosystem where information flowed like underground rivers, nourishing the roots of power while remaining unseen. The Byzantine system's true sophistication lay in its redundancy. Multiple couriers would carry fragments of the same message along different routes, ensuring completion even if most were captured. Some were sacrificial pawns, like the elderly monk who drew interrogators' attention with theatrical guilt while his younger counterpart slipped through with the vital dispatch. This web of deception was so effective that during the Crusades, European knights marveled at how Byzantine allies seemed to know a storm approaches before the clouds gather. What set these couriers apart wasn't just their methods, but their mindset. In an empire where speaking the wrong word could mean blindness or worse, they understood that truth wasn't absolute. It was a currency to be spent strategically. A message about enemy movements might be salted with minor inaccuracies to mislead spies, or delayed just long enough to let tempers cool. Their legacy endures in modern intelligence tradecraft, but with one key difference: where today's spies rely on satellites and encryption, the Byzantines proved that the human element, the subtle art of reading a room, of timing a whisper, could outmaneuver any army. In the end, their greatest weapon wasn't secrecy, but understanding that knowledge is only power when delivered by the right hands at the right moment, with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. While Byzantine couriers mastered the art of courtly deception, their counterparts in the Abbasid Caliphate turned message carrying into a science. Picture the House of Wisdom in 9th century Baghdad, where scholars like Al-Kindi didn't just study mathematics and philosophy, they revolutionized how secrets traveled. His manuscript on deciphering cryptographic messages didn't merely catalog ciphers, it laid the foundation for modern cryptanalysis by introducing frequency analysis, a method so groundbreaking it could crack codes by tracking how often letters appeared. This wasn't academic exercise, it was survival. When a shadow courier set out across the desert with peace terms for a rebellious governor, every swirl of ink in their scroll could mean the difference between alliance and annihilation. At the heart of this system stood figures like Jamal the Swift, whose legendary speed masked meticulous preparation. Where others saw only endless dunes, Jamal memorized every oasis and rock formation along the Silk Road's southern spur. His secret wasn't just horsemanship, it was timing. By riding through the cool darkness and resting during scorching afternoons, he covered distances in half the time of ordinary couriers. But his true genius lay in adaptation. When bandits began targeting fast riders, Jamal adopted the guise of a wandering poet, slowing his pace to match caravan speeds while reciting verses that secretly encoded troop movements along the frontier. The Caliphate's couriers did more than transport messages, they became living libraries. Multilingual scholars like Layla of Basra could negotiate in Persian, translate Greek scientific texts, and compose Arabic poetry with equal fluency. Her most daring act came during the siege of Samarra, when she smuggled out medical treatises by sewing parchment into her headscarf's embroidery, preserving knowledge that later inspired Avicenna's canon of medicine. Others safeguarded diplomacy itself. When tensions flared between the Abbasids and Tang China, couriers carried not just letters but cultural gifts. Astrolabes exchanged for silks, each object a silent argument for peace wrapped in the language of shared discovery. What set these messengers apart was their dual role as scholars and spies. Take the case of Hakim the Observer, who posed as an astronomer in the court of a rival emir. His detailed star charts secretly mapped fortress locations, while his celestial calculations recorded troop numbers. The system grew so sophisticated that some couriers developed specialized roles: memory couriers who never wrote anything down, or doubles who intentionally drew suspicion while their partners slipped through. Their legacy endures in unexpected ways. Modern diplomatic terms like safe passage trace back to the Caliphate's Barid system, where couriers carried sealed bamboo tubes marked with silver threads denoting urgency. The true measure of their success lies in what didn't happen. No chronicles record the wars prevented when a well-timed message revealed an invading army's route, or the rebellions quelled by discreetly delivered pardons. Their greatest triumph was invisibility, the treaties signed without fanfare, the knowledge preserved without plaques. In an era when empires rose and fell on the edge of a sword, these couriers proved that the pen's true power lies not in its flourish, but in its silent journey from one trusted hand to another, across deserts and centuries alike. Monasteries weren't just sanctuaries for prayer, they were the medieval internet, humming with whispered dispatches that shaped the fate of nations. The Cistercian abbeys, strategically spaced a day's ride apart, formed a chain of trust stretching from Scotland to Sicily. Each abbey's scriptorium doubled as a cipher room, where monks transcribed sensitive messages into psalter margins or etched them onto wax tablets that could be melted at the first sign of danger. But the true marvels were the couriers themselves, like Sister Marguerite, whose mind was a living parchment. Trained since childhood in the art of memoria, she could recite a 3,000-word treaty after a single reading, then deliver it weeks later without missing a syllable. Her most famous feat, carrying the terms of the Truce of Calais across enemy lines disguised as a beggar, her plain robes hiding neither weapons nor documents, just the flawless recall that made her the ultimate stealth weapon. Meanwhile, in the bustling ports of the Hanseatic League, commerce and espionage danced hand in hand. A barrel of salted herring might conceal a compartment holding sealed letters, while a merchant haggling over wool prices could be subtly signaling troop movements through prearranged phrases. The League's trade routes became the era's most reliable postal service, with ships' captains using a system of colored flags to indicate whether their holds carried spices, silk, or sensitive intelligence. One surviving ledger from Lubeck reveals how a single trading voyage transported 42 bales of Flanders cloth, 6 casks of Rhine wine, and the location of Burgundy's artillery emplacements, all recorded with the same dry efficiency. What made this network revolutionary was its decentralization. Unlike royal messengers who wore livery marking them as targets, these couriers blended into the medieval world's very fabric. A wandering friar hearing confession might gather intelligence from penitent soldiers, while a wool broker's gossip about sheep prices could hint at which nobles were stockpiling funds for war. The system's resilience was put to the test during the 100 Years' War, when traditional diplomacy collapsed. As kings postured and armies clashed, it was often these silent intermediaries, a nun here, a merchant there, who kept channels open, smuggling compromise proposals in hymn books or weaving ceasefire terms into tapestry patterns. Their legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Modern intelligence agencies still use the need-to-know principle medieval monks perfected, where no single courier understood the full scope of their mission. And just as Sister Marguerite's memory was her greatest tool, today's field operatives rely on mental encryption over physical documents when operating in hostile territory. The real lesson of Europe's shadow network isn't just about secrecy, it's about how truth survives by adapting to the cracks and crevices of everyday life, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, one whispered word at a time. A noblewoman's embroidery needle could be as deadly as a knight's sword, not in drawing blood, but in threading together the fragile alliances that held kingdoms from collapse. Elena of Aquitaine's court wasn't just a salon of poetry and finery. It was a nerve center of political intrigue where her ladies-in-waiting moved like shadows between castles. Their flowing sleeves hid folded dispatches, their gossip-laden conversations carried coded warnings, and their very presence at childbirths or weddings gave them access to chambers where armed men would never be admitted. One account describes how a young attendant smuggled terms for a truce between England and France by stitching the words into the hem of an infant's christening gown, a message delivered under the noses of warring kings who'd sooner cut each other's throats than share a negotiating table. Across continents, the kunoichi of Japan elevated disguise to an art form. Where male ninja relied on darkness and brute strength, these women weaponized societal invisibility. A traveling dancer's fan might conceal a compartment for maps, her hypnotic gestures signaling troop positions to observers in the crowd. Some posed as shrine maidens, their ritual purity granting them unchallenged passage through checkpoints, while others infiltrated households as servants, memorizing floor plans and overhearing secrets as they replenished sake cups. The most successful kunoichi weren't just couriers, they were psychologists, exploiting the era's dismissive attitude toward women to operate in plain sight. A courtesan's laughter could mask a whispered warning. A peasant woman's wail over a sick child might coordinate a rebel attack, but it wasn't just the elite or trained operatives who shaped history. In the markets of Moorish Spain, spice sellers like Fatima al-Qurtubiyya used their networks to relay messages between emirates, her stall's daily inventory changes indicating safe routes or impending raids. Midwives across Europe carried medical knowledge alongside political intelligence, their visits to noble households providing cover for exchanging sensitive information. Even the humblest roles became tools of subterfuge. A laundress in Burgundy soaked letters in alum solution, turning chemises into invisible scrolls that would reveal their secrets only when held near heat. These women understood something radical for their time, that power isn't always seized through force, but sometimes slipped between the folds of everyday life. What makes their legacy so transformative is how they redefined danger. While male couriers faced swords and gallows, women risked something equally terrifying: the total erasure of their reputations. A noblewoman caught carrying messages could be branded a harlot or traitor, a midwife accused of witchcraft, a merchant's daughter disowned for unwomanly behavior. Yet they persisted, not in spite of these risks, but because their marginalized positions granted them unique advantages. A man galloping toward a castle gate drew scrutiny. A woman arriving with baskets of herbs or bolts of linen was merely part of the scenery. Their stories force us to reconsider what espionage really looked like in the medieval world. It wasn't just about lone riders and moonlit rendezvous. It unfolded in birthing chambers and banquet halls, in the rustle of silk skirts and the rhythmic pounding of laundry stones. These women didn't just deliver messages, they wove an alternative tapestry of power, one where the quietest voices often carried the weight of empires. In a world that told them their worth lay in silence, they proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being heard. The Mongol Empire's YAM system might have been history's most efficient postal network, with relay stations spaced a day's ride apart and riders covering 200 miles in a single sprint. But its true brilliance lay in the Shadow Couriers who operated beyond its official routes. These weren't just messengers, they were living compasses, reading the steppes like a map written in wind and grass. Take Temujin the Ghost, a half-Tibetan scout whose very name whispered through Mongol camps like a legend. Where YAM riders followed established trails, Temujin moved like mist, his knowledge of nomadic clans letting him vanish into yurts for rest, emerging with intelligence on rival tribes' movements. His greatest coup came during the invasion of Khwarezmia, when he slipped through mountain passes to warn Genghis Khan of awaiting ambush information that turned certain defeat into a crushing victory. But speed wasn't always the priority. Some messages demanded stealth over haste, and here the Mongols turned nature itself into an ally. Falconry couriers trained golden eagles to carry silk thread scrolls in tiny leg capsules, the birds' flight paths untraceable and their loyalty absolute. One account describes a falcon delivering a plea for reinforcements across 300 miles of hostile territory, arriving as the besieged garrison's walls crumbled. The system was so reliable that European crusaders later adapted it into carrier pigeon networks, though they never matched the Mongols' precision. What set these couriers apart was their sacred status. Under Mongol law, harming a messenger, even an enemy's, was punishable by death, a rule so fiercely enforced that rival khans would often surrender rather than risk the khan's wrath. This protection extended to their tools, the famed paisa, a gold or silver passport tablet that granted couriers unlimited access to horses, supplies, and safe passage. Yet the most valuable passport wasn't metal at all, it was the courier's deep cultural fluency. Many spoke half a dozen languages from Uyghur to Persian and could mimic regional accents flawlessly. A courier approaching a Silk Road caravan might adopt the posture of a humble merchant, only to reveal his paisa at the last moment, demanding fresh mounts without breaking stride. Their legacy defies simple categorization. Were they spies, diplomats, early special forces? Perhaps they were all three, wrapped in the same wool and leather riding gear. The YAM's official records speak of distances and delivery times, but the silent work of shadow couriers shaped the empire's darkest corners, where a single whispered warning could decide whether a city stood or burned. In an empire built on conquest, their greatest weapon wasn't the sword, but the truth they carried across endless skies and unforgiving earth, proving that even the mightiest khans will meant nothing without the messengers who made it real. Consider the belt-buckle compass, no larger than a walnut, yet capable of guiding a courier through trackless forests when official roads meant capture. These tiny marvels of early engineering often bore false hallmarks, disguised as pilgrims' trinkets or merchant seals. But the real artistry lay in their dual functions. Twist the buckle one way, and it revealed a sundial for timing rendezvous. Twist another, and a hidden needle pointed north. Such tools weren't just clever, they were lifelines, especially for couriers navigating the shifting borders of the Holy Roman Empire, where a wrong turn could land them in hostile territory. Then there were the maps that defied convention. Painted on cured rabbit skins or thin vellum, they could be rolled into scroll cases or even dissolved in water if discovered. A surviving example from Castile shows a network of smugglers' trails along the Pyrenees, annotated with symbols only the courier would understand: a crescent moon for night crossings, a fish for river routes safe in spring floods. But the most ingenious were the living maps carried in couriers' minds. Some memorized landscapes through song, setting waypoints to melodies they'd hum while riding, ensuring even if captured, the terrain stayed locked in their skulls. Hollow coins might seem like something from a fable, yet archaeologists have uncovered several in old courier routes. These weren't crude contraptions. The best were minted with flawless seams, their compartment spring loaded to open only when pressed in a specific sequence. A Venetian operative known as Il Liuto took it further. His lute soundboard concealed a cavity for documents, accessible only by playing a particular chord progression that released a hidden catch. Music became his camouflage. Who would suspect an entertainer's instrument held battle plans? But the dagger pen stands as the ultimate symbol of the Shadow Courier's duality. Forged with a blade slender enough to slide between ribs, its hilt unscrewed to reveal a vial of ink and a nib. A courier could draft a treaty in a tavern one moment, defend themselves the next. These tools weren't just about function, they embodied the era's brutal pragmatism. When a message's success hinged on survival, every object had to serve multiple purposes, just as the couriers themselves shifted roles between scholar, spy, and soldier. What's striking is how these innovations mirrored the pressures of their time. In an age where carrying a map could be treason, where a single slip of parchment might ignite war, necessity didn't just mother invention, it fathered an entire art form. Each gadget whispers the same truth, that in the shadows where history's quietest battles were fought, brilliance often wore the disguise of the ordinary. To understand the mind of a shadow courier is to unravel a paradox. How could someone simultaneously trust no one yet inspire absolute confidence in those they served? Historical records and family oral histories paint a fascinating profile. These were individuals who could switch dialects mid-conversation, spot a tale from the corner of their eye, and sense betrayal in the slight hesitation of a handshake. Take the case of Matthias of Bruges, a 15th century courier whose descendants still preserve his journals. Fluent in 5 languages, a skill picked up navigating the multilingual chaos of Hanseatic ports, he noted how the pitch of a merchant's voice often revealed more than their words. His entries describe practicing facial expressions in a polished spoon, mastering the art of appearing bored during critical exchanges, and memorizing entire conversations by associating phrases with smells: peppercorns for troop numbers, lavender for truce terms. But linguistic genius was just the foundation. What truly set these couriers apart was their ability to think in layers. A friendly invitation to share a meal might be a test. An overly insistent guard could be probing for weaknesses. Descendants of Abbasid couriers recount training games where children learned to spot inconsistencies in travelers' stories: the wrong calluses for a farmer's hands, boots too clean for a desert crossing. This hyper-vigilance came at a cost. Letters from retired Venetian couriers described jumping at slamming shutters or distrusting even longtime allies, their minds forever trapped in the labyrinth of what if. Motivation varied as widely as their methods. Some, like Sister Clara of Augsburg, saw their work as divine, calling her coded psalms allegedly prevented a massacre between rival bishops. Others were driven by quieter urgencies. The story of Yusuf al-Andalusi, a Moorish courier who lost his family to a Christian raid, reveals how personal grief could fuel a career. For him, every successfully delivered message wasn't just duty, it was delayed vengeance, chipping away at the forces that shattered his world. Yet the most surprising trait wasn't their suspicion, but their profound empathy. To manipulate a border guard or charm a castle steward, couriers had to understand human desires intimately. A Genos operative's memoir details how he'd always carry extra sweets for guards' children, a small kindness that made him memorable as the nice spice merchant, deflecting suspicion. Their real weapon wasn't stealth, but emotional intelligence turned to tactical advantage. In an age where kings settled disputes through brute force, these silent operatives proved that understanding a person's fears could be more powerful than any sword thrust. The psychological toll left invisible scars. Retired couriers often struggled to reintegrate, too wary for ordinary friendships, too accustomed to coded speech. Some found solace in poetry, like the anonymous English courier whose ballads about the man who forgot how to trust became tavern favorites. Others, like the Byzantine operative Leo the Younger, channeled their skills into unexpected second acts. His talent for reading people made him a renowned mediator in merchant disputes. Their legacy whispers an uncomfortable truth, that the traits allowing them to navigate a treacherous world, the paranoia, the adaptability, the relentless observation, often left them stranded between lives, unable to fully inhabit either. Perhaps that's the final, heartbreaking brilliance of their psychology. They mastered the art of becoming whatever the moment demanded, a friend, a fool, a phantom, all while protecting a core self they revealed to no one. In a profession where authenticity could mean death, their greatest disguise wasn't a false beard or peasant's garb, but the ability to make even their own emotions unreadable. To study these individuals isn't just to uncover espionage tactics, it's to grapple with the ultimate human cost of wearing masks so well they sometimes forgot how to remove them. History remembers kings and treaties, but rarely the couriers who made both possible. Consider that fateful June day in 1215, when England's barons forced King John to seal the Magna Carta, a moment etched in every textbook. What those pages omit is the unnamed rider who, hours before royal forces could destroy the document, spirited away a duplicate copy through backcountry trails. His identity vanished into time, but his gamble preserved the charter that would later inspire constitutions across continents. The real brilliance wasn't just the escape, it was the foresight to create multiple copies, a tactic borrowed from Byzantine couriers, ensuring truth couldn't be erased by a single act of tyranny. Then there's the Siege of Toledo in 1085, where the Reconquista's tide turned on a single plea for help. A Mozarabic Christian disguised as a Moorish water carrier slipped through enemy lines with a message scratched onto palm leaves hidden in his sandals. His audacity lay not just in the disguise, but in his route scaling the Tagus River's cliffs at night, a path so treacherous even sentries didn't bother guarding it. The letter's recipient, Alfonso VI of Leon, reportedly wept upon reading it, then rallied his armies to break the siege within weeks. What's chilling is the aftermath. Records suggest the courier returned to Toledo as a spy, his knowledge of the city's tunnels later saving thousands during a massacre. But not all pivotal missions involved warfare. In 1439, a Florentine wool merchant's apprentice named Pirro the Swift carried news of Cosimo de' Medici's arrest from Venice to Florence, a 3-day sprint that should have taken 9. His warning allowed the Medici Bank to hide assets before authorities could seize them, preserving the fortune that would later fund the Renaissance. Pirro's method, a network of pre-positioned horses and a trick learned from Mongol couriers, chewing licorice root to stave off thirst. His reward wasn't gold, but something rarer, a handwritten thank-you note from Cosimo himself, now displayed in the Uffizi's archives. The common thread in these missions wasn't just courage, but an almost supernatural sense of timing. The courier who delivered the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 avoided main roads, intuiting that the Black Prince's enemies would ambush traditional routes. He arrived as both sides teetered on renewing war, his scroll halting hostilities just hours before bloodshed. Modern diplomats still study this incident for its lesson, that the right words matter little without the right person to deliver them at the precise moment they're needed. What's haunting is how close we came to losing these stories. The Magna Carta courier's name eroded from records. The Toledo messenger appears only as a footnote in a monk's chronicle. Yet their legacy lives on every time a protester cites habeas corpus or a nation enshrines rights into law. They remind us that history isn't just shaped by those who write the documents, but by those who ensure they survive the storm, ordinary individuals who, for one critical moment, carried the weight of the future in their hands. The fate of Matthias the Courier still sends chills down the spines of historians, not just for its brutality, but for what it reveals about the razor's edge these messengers walk. Captured near Regensburg with a letter detailing a plot against the Holy Roman Emperor, Matthias faced interrogation methods that would make modern spies shudder. His hands, those skilled tools that had folded countless dispatches and crafted perfect forgeries, were severed first, a deliberate act of symbolic violence. Yet even as the executioner's axe fell, Matthias's final act was one of defiance, biting through his own tongue to prevent his screams from demoralizing fellow couriers watching in disguise among the crowd. Failure wasn't merely personal tragedy, it reshaped entire intelligence networks. After Matthias's capture, Bavarian agents implemented a radical new protocol. Messages would now be split into thirds, carried by 3 separate couriers along divergent routes. Only when all fragments reached their destination could the full text be reconstructed. This fractured scroll method, born from desperation, became standard practice from Lisbon to Constantinople. Other networks took darker precautions. Venetian operatives began carrying vials of nightshade extract sewn into their collars, not for suicide, but to induce temporary blindness if captured, rendering torture useless. The collateral damage of failed missions often rippled farther than the couriers themselves. In 1284, the exposure of a French courier in England led to the massacre of an entire monastery in York, where monks had served as clandestine scribes. This sparked an eerie innovation, the wandering library system, where critical intelligence was memorized by groups of itinerant scholars who would only reunite their knowledge in safe territory. Like living jigsaw puzzles, each carried fragments meaningless alone but explosive when combined. Yet some failures yielded unexpected victories. When young courier Elsbeth of Mainz was caught smuggling troop movements in 1209, her captors dismissed her as a mere girl, until she revealed her confession was a masterful fiction, diverting their armies into a bog while the real attack came from the opposite direction. Her deception became textbook strategy, proving that even intercepted messages could be weapons if crafted with enough cunning. What makes these stories so poignant is how failure fueled progress. Every broken cipher birthed a stronger one. Every captured route map inspired more ingenious paths. The Shadow Courier's legacy isn't just in their triumphs, but in how their darkest hours forced espionage to evolve. They remind us that in the silent war for truth, even defeat can plant seeds for future victories, provided someone survives to carry the lesson forward. The question of whether shadow couriers were heroes or villains depends entirely on whose candle illuminated their work. To the French crown, Sister Marguerite's coded psalms might be divine intervention, but to the English lords whose plans she thwarted, she was nothing short of a heretic. This moral ambiguity fascinated medieval scholars almost as much as their missions. Thomas Aquinas himself wrestled with the ethics of espionage in his writings, reluctantly concluding that a lie told to preserve the common good could be justified, a loophole that couriers like Byzantine operative Leo the Younger exploited with precision. Leo famously refused to carry orders for mass poisonings, yet thought nothing of forging a bishop's seal to facilitate peace talks. His personal ledger, preserved in a monastery near Thessalonica, reveals agonizing choices. One entry describes abandoning a wounded comrade to prevent compromising a ceasefire agreement, a decision that haunted him for decades. Religious authorities were deeply divided. While Catholic inquisitors burned couriers for deceit unbecoming of Christian souls, Sufi mystics in Al-Andalus celebrated them as instruments of divine will. The Moorish courier Fatima al-Qurtubiyyah embodied this paradox. She broke Islamic prohibitions against deception daily, yet her messages saved countless lives during the siege of Cordoba by arranging food convoys past blockade lines. Her contemporary, Rabbi Eliezer of Worms, took a different approach. He taught that couriers could ethically alter messages to prevent bloodshed, but must never outright lie, a distinction that led to ingenious phrasing like "the army rests," meaning they were regrouping, not retreating. What's striking is how many couriers developed their own moral frameworks. The Hanseatic operative known as Matthias of the Roads kept a meticulous diary ranking his missions by shades of guilt, from delivering grain prices harmless to revealing a rival's mistress regrettable but necessary. Others drew hard lines. Venetian messenger Elena Dandelo's surviving letters reveal she flatly refused to transport anything related to child hostages, a stance that nearly got her banished before her network realized her principles made her more trustworthy, not less. These dilemmas echo eerily in modern debates. When a 21st century whistleblower exposes surveillance overreach, or a journalist protects a source with encrypted messages, they walk the same tightrope as those medieval couriers weighing loyalty against conscience, secrecy against justice. The key difference: today's secrets travel at the speed of light, but the human cost of carrying them remains as heavy as ever. Perhaps that's why these shadowy figures still captivate us, not because their world was so different, but because their struggles hold up a mirror to our own, asking who we might become if entrusted with truths too dangerous to speak aloud. The art of becoming a shadow courier wasn't learned overnight. It was a slow alchemy of discipline and danger, passed like a sacred torch from one generation to the next. Picture a 12-year-old crouched in a candlelit cellar, their fingers tracing invisible ink recipes onto parchment while an elder whispered, "A message isn't safe until it can vanish before your eyes." These apprenticeships often ran in families where trust was as hereditary as eye color. The Contarini dynasty of Venice, for example, produced 7 generations of couriers, each child weaned on ciphers before they could properly hold a spoon. Their training grounds weren't just classrooms but the world itself, market stalls where they practiced lifting purses to hone dexterity, or pilgrim roads where they learned to blend into crowds while memorizing the cadence of foreign tongues. Languages were the first pillar of mastery. A promising apprentice might spend mornings reciting Persian poetry, afternoons drilling Frankish battle commands, and evenings deciphering Hebrew merchant ledgers, all before supper. But fluency alone wasn't enough. They had to mimic regional accents down to the slightest lisp, like the legendary Genos courier who fooled Moorish sentries by perfecting the Andalusian habit of swallowing vowel sounds. Geography lessons were equally immersive. Trainees navigated blindfolded through forests using only bird calls and wind direction, or reconstructed entire city grids from memory after a single walkthrough, skills that later saved lives when escape routes collapsed in sieges. Then came the crucible of combat training, where elegance mattered more than brute strength. A courier's dagger work focused on disabling rather than killing, a slash to the thigh to slow pursuers, a well-placed elbow to break a nose and create diversionary chaos. Venetian recruits trained in aqua alta alleys, learning to fight on unstable wooden walkways that simulated horseback skirmishes, but the true test was psychological. Mock interrogations were conducted with chilling realism, apprentices locked in freezing cellars while masked inquisitors alternated between offers of warmth and threats of dismemberment. Only those who kept their stories straight under sleep deprivation and false promises of mercy earned their mentor's nod. The most elite programs rivaled knightly academies in rigor. Venice's Scuola di Silentio, the School of Silence, required students to spend an entire year communicating solely through gestures and written codes, punishing any slip into casual speech with grueling night watches. Graduates could reportedly convey complex troop movements using nothing but the arrangement of fruit in a market stall. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, palace couriers trained alongside eunuch scholars, mastering the art of blending into gilded corridors where a single misstep could mean impalement. What's striking is how these traditions shaped history's quietest power brokers. When young Elena of Aquitaine sent her first encrypted message via a troubadour's love song, she was standing on the shoulders of generations of women who'd turned needlework into intelligence networks. The Mongol Empire's YAM system didn't just happen. It was built on nomadic children who'd played message tag across the steppes since they could ride. This generational knowledge created something far greater than individual couriers. It forged living systems where tradecraft flowed as naturally as bloodlines, ensuring that even when empires fell, the art of carrying truth through darkness never died. Long before history books recorded their deeds, shadow couriers galloped through the realm of myth and legend, their exploits woven into the very fabric of storytelling. Take the Arthurian tale of the Green Knight, that enigmatic figure who rides into Camelot bearing a holly branch and a deadly challenge. Scholars have long noted striking parallels between his role and real-life medieval couriers who delivered ultimatums between warring lords. Like his historical counterparts, the Green Knight operates under strict codes of conduct, his supernatural test of Gawain mirroring the unspoken rules that protected actual messengers from harm. Even his color, that impossible emerald hue, echoes the tradition of couriers wearing distinctive greens or browns to blend into forested routes. Across continents, Japan's folk hero Ishikawa Goemon embodies the courier's dual nature. Before becoming the legendary outlaw who boiled alive in a cauldron, stories claim he served as a messenger between rival daimyos. His later rebellion against corrupt lords reflects a deeper truth, that couriers who saw too much injustice often became its greatest foes. The Tokugawa shogunate allegedly feared his network of informants more than his swordsmanship, a testament to how messenger skills could transform into revolutionary tools. These legends did more than entertain, they preserved cultural memories of the courier's vital role. Slavic folklore is filled with figures like the Zime Goranich, a three-headed dragon who demands tribute messages from villagers, perhaps echoing the very real extortion faced by messengers crossing bandit-controlled territories. Even nursery rhymes hold traces of their legacy. The English chant, "Ride a cock horse to Banbury Cross," may reference Elizabethan couriers who disguised royal dispatches as harmless market songs. The line between fact and fiction blurs most beautifully in the Norse sagas. When the skaldic poet Sigvatar recounts delivering peace terms between Norway and Sweden, his verses include supernatural encounters with trolls, likely metaphors for the very real dangers of mountain passes. These stories served a practical purpose too. Exaggerating a courier's adventures discouraged rivals from intercepting them, much like fishermen's tales of sea monsters kept competitors from fertile waters. What makes these legends so enduring isn't just their drama, but the uncomfortable truths they mask. For every romanticized Robin Hood-esque messenger, countless real couriers died anonymously in ditches. The Green Knight's invincibility fantasy contrasts sharply with records of Byzantine messengers whose hands were severed for simply bearing bad news. Perhaps that's why cultures elevated them to mythic status, not just to celebrate their courage, but to atone for how often history failed to protect them. Their stories remind us that every fairy tale messenger racing against time is a shadowy echo of real individuals who once carried the weight of the world in their satchels, their names forgotten but their impact etched into the stories we still tell today. The transition from handwritten scrolls to the earliest printing presses didn't just change how information was recorded, it revolutionized how shadow couriers safeguarded it. Consider the case of watermarks, those subtle designs pressed into paper during its creation. What began as a maker's signature soon became a courier's lifeline. A Florentine operative in the 1400s could identify a forgery at a glance by the absence of a specific bull's head watermark, while Venetian spies embedded tiny variations in the watermark's position to indicate a document's urgency. Paper itself became a canvas for deception. Some couriers soaked dispatches in alum solution, leaving messages invisible until heated, a trick that turned an ordinary shipping manifest into a battlefield map when held near a candle. But innovation wasn't limited to paper. Venetian couriers stationed along the Adriatic coast mastered an early form of optical telegraphy, using primitive telescopes to read coded flag signals from distant watchtowers. These flashes of fabric and light could relay a warning about approaching ships faster than any rider, buying critical hours to reroute sensitive cargo. The system was so effective that rival states hired glassmakers to craft counterfeit telescopes, hoping to intercept the signals, only to discover the real couriers used lenses ground to a unique curvature that distorted unauthorized viewers' sightlines. Every technological leap sparked a countermove. When the printing press made mass forgeries possible, couriers developed living seals, tiny imperfections in wax stamps that changed subtly with each use, like the way a particular notary always smudged the lower left corner. Intercepting a document became meaningless if you couldn't replicate the seal's unique flaws. Meanwhile, in the Ottoman Empire, scribes began writing messages in spirals that only made sense when wrapped around specific-sized rods, a technique borrowed from ancient Greek sightales but perfected with the precision of Renaissance engineering. The most fascinating adaptations emerged from necessity's crucible. After a series of courier pigeons were shot down over Burgundy, French operatives trained the birds to fly only at dawn and dusk, their gray feathers blending into twilight. Others exploited the era's superstitions. A Hungarian courier disguised his carrier ravens by dyeing their feathers white, knowing locals would dismiss them as ghost birds rather than intercept them. Even the humble abacus found new purpose. Mongol couriers used bead positions to encode troop numbers during inspections, their calculations looking like mundane market accounting to prying eyes. What made these adaptations remarkable wasn't just their ingenuity, but their universality. From the silk roads of Persia to the rain-slicked streets of London, every culture developed its own solutions to the same eternal problem: how to make truth move faster than deception. The tools evolved, but the game remained unchanged, a relentless dance between those who sought to protect information and those who sought to steal it. Each advancement in technology not an ending, but a new verse in history's oldest song. The age of shadow couriers didn't vanish overnight. It faded like ink on weathered parchment, eroded by the slow march of bureaucracy and the birth of modern statecraft. The turning point came with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, a document that didn't just redraw Europe's borders but rewrote the rules of diplomacy itself. Suddenly, kings and princes preferred envoys in powdered wigs over hooded riders, valuing public negotiations over whispered secrets in torchlit corridors. The New World Order prized legitimacy over subterfuge, and with each stamped seal on an official treaty, the Shadow Courier's art grew rarer. Yet even as their profession waned, their ingenuity refused to die. The French postal system under Louis XIV adopted their methods: wholesale relay stations spaced a day's ride apart, riders sworn to secrecy, even the old trick of hiding urgent dispatches inside hollowed-out walking sticks. What had once been the tools of espionage now carried tax records and marriage announcements. Meanwhile, England's fledgling intelligence services recruited former couriers to train their operatives. A surviving manual from 1662 details how to extract information from tavern chatter using techniques perfected by medieval messengers posing as pilgrims. The past wasn't discarded, it was repurposed. Some transitions were poetic. The same Venetian glassmakers who'd once crafted lenses for secret signal towers now supplied telescopes to naval commanders. The hollow coins that had smuggled treasonous plots became the prototypes for diplomatic pouches. Even the Mongols' falconry networks found new life, not carrying messages, but delivering weather reports to early scientific societies. The courier's greatest legacy wasn't any single technique, but a mindset. That information, when handled with creativity and care, could bend the arc of history. What's often overlooked is how fiercely some resisted this change. In the Alps, an aging courier named Klaus Der still continued running his mountain route for decades after official channels existed, trusted by villagers who distrusted the new postal taxes. His ledgers, preserved in an Innsbruck archive, show deliveries as late as 1703, mostly love letters and folk remedies, but occasionally a coded note between dissident scholars. He wasn't just a holdout, he was a living bridge between eras, proof that some truth still traveled best in the hands of those who remembered when silence was the ultimate currency. The real transformation wasn't in the disappearance of shadow couriers, but in how their craft seeped into the foundations of the modern world. Every encrypted email, every dead drop in a spy thriller, every diplomatic immunity clause traces back to their innovations. They taught humanity that information is more than words, it's power, and the methods of carrying it shape empires as surely as armies do. Their twilight wasn't an ending, but a metamorphosis, from the shadows of medieval forests to the unseen architecture of how we communicate today. The glow of a smartphone screen is today's candlelight, and the tap of encrypted messages has replaced the rustle of parchment, but the stakes feel hauntingly familiar. Modern journalists dodging state surveillance, whistleblowers leaking documents through decentralized networks, even teenagers live-streaming protests from oppressive regimes, they're all spiritual heirs to the Shadow Courier's legacy. Encryption algorithms now do the work of lemon juice and wax seals, transforming sensitive truths into unreadable code until they reach the right eyes. The dark web mirrors the smuggler's trails of medieval Europe, where anonymity is both shield and weapon. And just as a courier's satchel once carried treaties that could halt wars, today a single USB stick or cloud upload can expose corruption that topples governments. Yet the parallels run deeper than tools and tactics. The psychological toll remains unchanged. Like Matthias biting through his tongue to protect his network, modern sources endure solitary confinement and character assassination rather than betray confidences. The Byzantine courier, who memorized messages to leave no physical trace, would recognize the tradecraft of activists who communicate through memorized passphrases, leaving no digital footprint. Even the old trick of hiding letters in plain sight finds its counterpart in steganography, embedding data in cat videos or Instagram posts where censors least expect it. What's chilling is how little the dangers have evolved. Medieval lords burned couriers as spies. Today's autocrats label journalists as terrorists. The Mongol paser that guaranteed safe passage feels eerily similar to the press badges torn from reporters' jackets in war zones. And just as shadow couriers once relied on the public's indifference to move unseen, modern truth-bearers exploit the noise of social media, their revelations buried in the avalanche of daily content until the right moment. But here's where their legacy becomes urgent. Those medieval messengers proved that truth survives not through brute force, but through adaptation. Whether it's a Venetian turning lute strings into cipher keys or a hacker repurposing gaming forums for whistleblowing. Their greatest lesson wasn't about secrecy, but resilience, that when one route is blocked, another must be found. In an age where misinformation spreads like wildfire, their stories remind us that the fight for truth isn't new, it's just wearing different disguises. And perhaps that's the most powerful parallel of all, the quiet understanding that every generation must relearn the same vital lesson. That information in the right hands can still be the mightiest force of all. The Black Monk of Burgundy still haunts the archives, not with ghostly whispers, but with the deafening silence of a disappearance too perfect to be accidental. Last seen in 1426 carrying a message between warring dukes, he vanished near Cluny Abbey, leaving only his distinctive onyx signet ring in the mud. Conspiracy theories bloom like medieval herbs in the dark. Some claim he faked his death to join the elusive Brethren of the Silent Way, a rumored guild of disgraced couriers turned underground arbitrators. Others whisper he was intercepted by a rival's agents, his body dissolved in quicklime to erase all evidence. The truth may lie in a cryptic ledger entry from that year noting payment rendered to the hooded ones, a phrase some scholars link to professional disappearances arranged by monastic networks. Equally baffling is the case of the scribe of Toledo, a multilingual Jew named Elias ben Abraham, whose detailed accounts of Castilian court intrigue simply. His final parchment, dated 1289, contains a half-finished sentence about the king's true heir, the ink trailing off as if interrupted mid-stroke. No ransom demand surfaced, no body was found. What chills historians isn't just the mystery, but the precision of the erasure, like someone methodically unpicking stitches from fabric. A later inventory of the Royal Library revealed 12 folios excised with surgical precision, their contents known only through Elias's earlier references. Was he killed for documenting a succession secret, or did he, like the legendary Alhambra couriers, stage his own vanishing to protect a truth too dangerous to carry? Then there's the enigma of the Ice Rider, a Finnish courier whose frozen corpse was discovered in 1503 near Viborg, perfectly preserved with a sealed message tube still strapped to his chest. The contents, blank parchment. Infrared scans centuries later revealed faint indentations suggesting text had been pressed then scraped away, the vellum reused in panic. Nearby, a second set of footprints led to the shoreline and disappeared, as if someone had boarded a waiting boat. The real message may have been memorized, the blank scroll a decoy for interceptors. But why stage such an elaborate ruse only to abandon the courier's body in plain view? Some believe the Ice Rider was meant to be found, his very corpse carrying a warning we no longer understand. These unsolved cases share an eerie common thread. Each missing courier was handling information that threatened to rewrite power structures. The Black Monk's last dispatch allegedly exposed a duke's bastard heir. The scribe's notes could have delegitimized a royal line. The Ice Rider's erased message coincided with Sweden's brutal suppression of Finnish rebels. Their disappearances weren't accidents, they were the sound of history's door slamming shut on truths too volatile to survive. Unlike fallen soldiers or executed traitors, these couriers left no martyrs' legends, just ragged holes in the record where the full story should be. Perhaps that was always the point, to make the messenger vanish so completely, even the message would be doubted. What lingers isn't just the mysteries themselves, but what they reveal about the fragility of truth in any age. A burned letter can be reconstructed from drafts. A beheaded courier becomes a symbol, but an absence, a void where a person once stood, that's the perfect crime, one that still taunts us centuries later, proving that sometimes the most powerful messages aren't the ones delivered, but the ones that disappeared without a trace. Those shadow couriers didn't just carry messages, they carried responsibility for truth itself, a burden that feels achingly familiar today. In our age of deepfakes and algorithm-driven misinformation, their insistence on verifying every source before risking their lives seems almost radical. Take the Byzantine courier who refused to deliver a treaty until he'd personally witnessed both armies' positions, or the Moorish messenger who cross-checked her intelligence with 3 separate spice traders before committing it to memory. Their methods weren't just about secrecy, they were early blueprints for media literacy, proving that trust must be earned, not given. When a 14th century courier spotted inconsistencies in a wax seal's imperfections, they'd reroute rather than risk delivering manipulated information. That same skepticism could save us today from sharing viral lies before checking their origins. But their real lesson wasn't just in detecting deception, it was in valuing the messengers themselves. Medieval rulers understood something we often forget. Attacking truth-bearers silences future warnings. The Mongols' strict punishment for harming any messenger, even an enemy's, wasn't just about etiquette. It preserved the fragile ecosystem of information that kept empires functioning. Contrast that with today's doxing of whistleblowers or smear campaigns against journalists, and the parallels sting. When Venetian operatives developed contingency plans to protect their couriers' families, they weren't being sentimental. They were ensuring someone would always be willing to carry the next dangerous truth. Perhaps most poignant is how these couriers weaponized transparency when secrecy failed. After Matthias's torture in Regensburg, his network began embedding verification clues within their messages, tiny flourishes in handwriting or predetermined phrases that confirmed authenticity. Modern fact-checkers do the same with digital watermarks and blockchain timestamps, fighting manipulation with the same ingenuity. Even their failures hold wisdom. The intercepted courier who deliberately carried false intelligence taught us that sometimes the best defense against misinformation is flooding the system with better lies, a tactic now used by cybersecurity experts to confuse hackers. Their legacy challenges us to ask uncomfortable questions. Would we chew through our own tongues to protect a source? Would we memorize a whistleblower's testimony rather than risk leaving digital traces? In an era where truth feels increasingly negotiable, their unshakable ethos that some facts are worth protecting with your life becomes not just history but a mirror. The parchment and wax seals have been replaced by encrypted servers and burner phones, but the essential struggle remains unchanged, ensuring truth survives its journey through hostile territory, no matter the cost. The stories of these 23 shadow couriers linger like half-forgotten ink on ancient parchment, faint but indelible. Their true impact wasn't measured in the messages they delivered, but in the futures they made possible. The wars averted by a well-timed warning, the rebellions cooled by a smuggled pardon, the alliances forged in the secrecy of coded letters. They operated in the margins of history, yet their choices rippled across centuries. Consider the Florentine apprentice whose sprint saved the Medici fortune, or the Byzantine eunuch who stitched rebellion plans into imperial robes. These weren't just feats of daring, they were acts of faith, a belief that truth, no matter how fragile, could outmaneuver swords and sieges if placed in the right hands. What makes their legacy urgent today isn't just their cleverness, but their understanding of truth as a living thing, something to be nurtured, protected, and sometimes hidden until it's strong enough to survive. In an era of algorithm-driven misinformation, their insistence on verification feels prophetic. That Venetian courier who were routed at the slightest inconsistency in a wax seal. He'd recognize our modern struggle to discern fact from fabrication. The Mongol riders who safeguarded messengers as sacred, they'd weep at today's attacks on journalists and whistleblowers. The tools have changed. Encryption replaces lemon juice, satellites outpace falcons, but the essential battle remains, getting truth safely from those who uncover it to those who need it most. So the next time you hesitate before sharing an unverified claim, or pause to question a too convenient narrative, remember you're part of an unbroken chain. Those shadow couriers didn't just serve kings, they served the idea that truth matters enough to risk everything for. Their world had no internet, no printing press, no democratic ideals, just the stubborn conviction that some words were worth carrying through darkness. As we face our own storms of deception and manipulation, let their stories be our compass, because history whispers a warning they knew all too well. When messengers are silenced, the first casualty is never just information. It's the future those truths could have built. If these hidden architects of history have taught us anything, it's that light survives longest when someone refuses to let go.